The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, dust floating in the beams like tiny dancers. I stood barefoot on the cold tiles of the kitchen, fingers curled around a mug that had long since lost its warmth. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that doesn't comfort but isolates. Behind me, the clock ticked methodically, like a reminder I hadn't asked for. Outside, the neighbor was fixing his bike again. No shirt, just low-slung jeans smeared with oil and a focus that made everything else seem irrelevant. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had that effortless confidence in the way he moved. He wasn't looking at me. Or maybe he was. There was a moment when his gaze lifted, and I didn't look away fast enough. It wasn't a stare. Not really. But something passed through me like a flicker of electricity. I tightened the belt of my robe reflexively. The fabric brushed against the skin of my thigh, suddenly too soft, too noticeable. I don't think I even realized I was lingering until I heard the sound of my husband's shoes on the stairs behind me. He kissed me on the cheek, distracted, already checking his phone. I murmured something about breakfast, but my mind had drifted elsewhere. Not to the neighbor exactly, but to the way my body had responded. To being seen, maybe even desired. Later, while folding laundry, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Not younger, not better, but different. There was something in the way my hips moved, a new slowness in how I ran my fingers through my hair. I found myself choosing a different set of underwear. Not the usual cotton, but the soft lace I rarely wore. For no reason. For no one. At dinner, my husband talked about numbers, meetings, someone at work who got promoted. I nodded at all the right times. But my thoughts slipped again, drifting back to the backyard, to that glance. Not because it meant anything, but because it made me feel something. Before bed, I stood at the window in silence. The neighbor's house was dark, except for the faint glow of a lamp. And then, just barely visible, his silhouette. Smoking, maybe. Watching, maybe not. I couldn't tell. I went to bed in that same lace set. He didn't notice. He fell asleep before I turned off the light. But I noticed. I felt the fabric against my skin and wondered, not about what would happen, but what already had. Inside me. I hadn't expected to see him so soon again. It was a Tuesday, dull and uneventful, when the delivery truck left a large, unmarked box at our front door. My husband had texted earlier. He'd be working late. I stared at the box, its weight a mystery, until I realized it was the new garden heater we'd ordered weeks ago and forgotten. I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, then looked across the street. He was in his garage. Shirt on this time, a faded gray t-shirt clinging to the curve of his back as he leaned over a workbench. There was grease on his forearms and a pencil tucked behind one ear. Before I had time to reconsider, I called out. Too loudly, too rehearsed, asking if he had a hand truck or something to help me bring the box inside. He looked up, startled for half a second, and then smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. His fingers brushed against mine as he took the box from me. Not accidentally, not intentionally. Just enough to feel the warmth of skin. We carried it through the gate and into the garage, a space that smelled of motor oil, wood shavings, and something faintly citrusy. His cologne, or maybe just soap. He moved with a kind of grace, like he knew how close his body was to mine without ever needing to touch. The heater was heavier than it looked. He bent over to adjust the box, and I caught myself watching the movement of his arms, the way his shirt stretched across his back. It wasn't desire in the raw, obvious way. It was curiosity. It was awareness. "You could have waited for your husband," he said, not unkindly. "He's working late," I replied, and immediately regretted the casualness of my tone. He glanced up, eyes steady. "Of course," he said, almost under his breath. There was a silence. Comfortable at first, then charged. My hand grazed the metal shelf beside me, fingers idly tracing a paint-stained rag. And then I felt it. His hand covering mine. Not pressing, just resting. We didn't look at each other. My breath caught. Shallow. Sharp. When I finally did meet his eyes, there wasn't hesitation. There wasn't fear. It wasn't a question. And it wasn't rushed. His lips found mine with an almost unbearable slowness, like he was giving me time to pull away. I didn't. It wasn't a kiss like in films. No music, no fade to black. It was warm, real, full of breath and the smell of the garage and the faint taste of coffee on his lips. And then, just as suddenly, it ended. He stepped back. No words, no apologies. I walked out first, my hands trembling as I tried to find the keys in my pocket. My legs felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. I didn't look back. That night, I sat beside my husband as he went over figures and dates, the glow of his tablet casting a pale blue across his face. He asked me how my day was, and I said, fine. I wore the same lace set to bed, and he still didn't notice. But I did. I noticed everything. The shift in my body, the weight of my silence, the echo of his mouth on mine that I could still feel in the hollow beneath my throat. And more than anything else, I noticed that for the first time in a very long time, I was waiting for tomorrow. I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out, caught between rest and tension, like my body refused to fully settle. The room felt colder than usual, even with the duvet pulled up to my chin. He slept deeply beside me, his breathing slow and steady. I turned onto my side and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, the memory of the kiss still pressed against my skin like the ghost of a bruise. Morning came with the weight of routine, the scent of fresh coffee, the rustling of a newspaper, the clink of a spoon against porcelain. I moved through it all automatically, like a shadow in my own life. He sat at the table, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the shower. I watched his hands as he buttered toast, remembered how they used to linger on my waist, on my back. Now they moved with efficiency, not affection. I was thinking we could go to the market this weekend, he said, not looking up. It's been a while. I nodded, unsure whether to feel relief or guilt that he'd noticed the distance. Maybe both. Sure, I said. That'd be nice. But it wasn't the weekend yet. It was Thursday. The air outside was dry and cool, and the sun felt pale. We went to the market in the late morning. He insisted. Said it would be less crowded, easier to park. I agreed to everything, smiled when I needed to, touched his arm lightly when he pointed out fresh peaches like it meant something. That's when I saw him. He was at a stall 2 rows over, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, examining tomatoes with the kind of attention most people reserve for delicate artwork. He hadn't seen me, at least I didn't think he had. Until he looked up, eyes locking onto mine with a precision that sent heat straight to my stomach. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just watched me. I dropped my gaze quickly and turned toward my husband, but not before catching the smallest movement. Him approaching. And then he was there, not beside me. No, that would have drawn too much attention. He stopped at a different stall, maybe 2 steps behind, and reached for a bag of apples. His hand brushed mine when I reached for the same, and for a split second, our fingers touched. It was nothing. And it was everything. He leaned in slightly, his voice low, nearly drowned out by the hum of conversation around us. Golden delicious, he said. Not as sweet as they look. I said nothing. Couldn't. My throat was dry, my heart stuttering against my ribs. My husband looked up, called my name to ask if I wanted to pick out some grapes. I nodded and moved away, feeling the brush of his fingers linger like static on my skin. The rest of the trip blurred. I remember holding a brown paper bag tightly against my chest, as though it could conceal the tremor in my hands. In the car, he played a podcast. I stared out the window, watched trees rush past, and wondered what my face looked like to him. Tired? Distant? Normal? That night, I wrote a note on thick paper from the kitchen drawer. No greeting, no name. Just 5 words. Do you feel it too? I folded it twice, slipped it into an envelope, and walked across the street in my robe when the sky was nearly black. I pretended to check the mailbox, fingers trembling as I slid the note into his. My pulse beat loud in my ears. Back inside, I lay in bed wide awake, every part of me humming. And still, the lace brushed against my skin like a secret, soft and deliberate, as if reminding me, this is no longer about him. This is about you. The envelope was gone by morning. I told myself it could have been anyone who took it. Someone walking by, kids playing a prank, even a gust of wind. But deep down, I knew. The way his eyes had met mine at the market, the silence that crackled in that touch, the stillness of his hands. He knew, and he took it. That was enough to keep me restless all day. It rained in the afternoon, thin needles tapping against the windows, puddles blooming across the pavement. I canceled my plans, said I had a headache, and wandered the house like a ghost. I stood in the bedroom, opened my closet, and ran my fingers across fabrics I hadn't worn in years. Silks, soft knits, slips I used to save for special occasions. I chose a dress. Long sleeves, a deep navy color that clung slightly at the waist, subtle but intentional. Underneath, I picked a matching bra and underwear, both trimmed in lace, the kind that had always made me feel a little more awake inside my skin. I didn't know why I dressed like that to stay home, but something in me needed to feel noticed, even if only by myself. By dusk, the rain had grown heavier, the kind that blurred outlines, made the neighborhood seem like a watercolor. I was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart leapt, irrational and certain. I moved toward the door slowly, my breath catching when I saw him through the frosted glass. He was soaked. Hair clinging to his forehead, t-shirt plastered to his body, jeans darkened by the rain. His eyes were calm, but there was something behind them, something restrained. Umbrella gave up halfway, he said, lifting a hand like a confession. I saw your lights on. I stepped aside, barely speaking. Come in, I'll get you a towel. In the hallway, I handed him a thick folded towel. He rubbed it over his hair, then across the back of his neck. Drops of water still glistened on his arms, trailing to his elbows. I watched him as if from a distance, trying to understand the rhythm of my own thoughts. He looked up just as I did, and for a moment, neither of us moved. You left something for me, he said. Not a question. I wasn't sure you'd take it. I thought about not doing it. He paused, but I did. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said, everything we couldn't. The hallway felt smaller, the walls closer. My dress clung to my back where the fabric had caught the warmth of my body. He didn't reach for me. He didn't need to. His gaze traced the edge of my collarbone, the fall of my hair over one shoulder, the curve of my bare wrist. My skin tingled as though he had touched every part of me without moving. I should go, he said finally, his voice low, uncertain. I nodded. I didn't want him to. He stepped outside, the rain still pouring. I watched him retreat through the haze until his form blurred into the gray. It wasn't until I turned back to close the door that I saw it, the towel, folded neatly on the porch bench. On top of it, a small slip of paper. Yes, I feel it. I stood there for a long time, wet wind brushing my skin, the door still open behind me and something inside me tipping, quiet but irreversible. The note stayed in the drawer of my vanity for days, tucked beneath a velvet pouch of forgotten earrings. I'd reread it without meaning to. Each time I opened the drawer, each time I passed by, brushing a hand against the polished wood like a nervous tick. The words weren't dramatic, weren't even intimate, but they pulsed. A quiet affirmation that everything shifting inside me wasn't imagined. I waited 2 days. Not out of restraint, but because I didn't trust myself not to act too quickly. But on the third evening, I found myself pacing the hallway with a glass of wine in hand, rereading a text from my husband. Late again. Don't wait up. It landed softer than it should have. The neighbor's porch light was off. His car sat in the driveway. I stood barefoot on the kitchen tiles, staring at the clock, then at the blinking cursor on the computer screen. That was my excuse. I needed help with the new budgeting app. He worked in finance or something close enough. I wrote a note, crumpled it, wrote another, then gave up and walked across the street. I didn't knock like someone who needed help. I knocked like someone who had already decided what would happen, even if I didn't know how far it would go. He opened the door slower than I expected. A flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, collar open. He didn't smile, didn't step back. I won't stay long, I said, though I didn't mean it. It's just, I can't figure out the damn settings. He stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and lemon cleaner. It was clean, not staged, lived in. He led me to a small desk near the window, where his laptop sat open. I leaned over to show him the site, and for a moment, he stood behind me. Too close. His breath grazed the edge of my neck. Here, he said, reaching over my shoulder, hand brushing mine on the mouse. I could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of my sleeve. We pretended for 10 minutes, talked about numbers, passwords, budgets. The screen blurred. My focus turned inward. Heartbeat, breath, the pull low in my stomach. When the power flickered, the room dimmed for a second. A fuse, probably. Or maybe the storm still rolling somewhere past the hill. Wait here, he said, disappearing down the hallway. I stood there, hands braced against the edge of the desk, chest rising and falling. When he returned, the light hadn't changed, but something in the air had. I turned to face him. Our eyes locked. You shouldn't have come, he said, quiet, almost unsure. But I did. He stepped forward slowly, not as a test, but as surrender. And I didn't move. The kiss was inevitable. It didn't rush. It unfolded. His lips brushed mine softly at first, like he was waiting for a signal. I gave it without words, without even thought, just the way my body leaned into his, fingers lifting to the collar of his shirt. It wasn't fevered or messy. It was known, like we'd somehow already done this in another version of our lives, and this one had just caught up. We didn't go further. We didn't need to. The moment itself was enough to redraw everything. I left soon after. The sky was dry now, the night still. I walked slowly across the street, feeling the weight of what hadn't happened, what almost had, and how much I already craved it again. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in nothing but the pale lace I'd chosen hours before, consciously, deliberately. My skin was flushed, not from shame, but from being fully awake. My husband stirred in his sleep as I slid into bed beside him. He reached for me, instinctively placing a hand on my hip, and murmured something unintelligible. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. But I stared at the ceiling for a long time, one arm above my head, still tasting him in the corners of my mouth. And I knew I wouldn't stop now. Not because I was reckless, but because this had started something in me that I couldn't unfeel. The next morning unfolded with quiet precision. Coffee brewed, the newspaper folded neatly beside his plate, and me, performing every motion as though muscle memory were enough to keep my world in order. I wore a sweater he once said he liked, though I couldn't remember when. He complimented my hair. Not directly, just a passing comment about how clean I looked today. I nodded, poured his coffee, and watched him stir in sugar like he always did. 3 spoons, each click of metal against ceramic marking time we no longer felt. It wasn't that I didn't care. I did. In a way that was calm and practical and numb. There was still affection, still shared history, but intimacy had become like a language we'd forgotten how to speak fluently. The notes were there, the melody familiar, but the music itself had stopped years ago. I made reservations for Saturday, he said, not looking up. That place you used to like, by the water. I hesitated, surprised. That's thoughtful. He looked at me then, actually looked. I've been thinking maybe we've been too wrapped up in everything lately. Work, deadlines, you and I, we could use some time together. There was no accusation in his voice, just intent, an effort, a gesture I had once begged for without words, and now, receiving it, felt a strange grief settle in my chest. Because it was too late. Or maybe it wasn't. But the version of me who had longed for that dinner had already died in silence, sometime between forgotten anniversaries and long, absent stares over shared meals. That sounds nice, I said, not knowing what else to say. I spent the day suspended between two worlds. In one, I was the woman I had always been. Wife, neighbor, reliable and composed. In the other, I was someone I had only recently discovered. A woman who felt her own skin again, who savored the tension of anticipation like oxygen. Every small touch, every remembered glance from across the street played on loop in my head. He didn't message. He didn't knock. He didn't even appear at the end of the driveway to check the mail. And yet I felt him constantly. His presence was a pressure beneath my ribs, quiet and heavy. That night, after dinner, my husband poured wine and lit candles without prompting. The table was set deliberately, with cloth napkins and the good silverware. He made an effort with his words, his tone warmer than I remembered. He reached for my hand and held it too tightly, like someone who had realized they'd let go without meaning to. Later, he touched me. Gently, reverently, as if rediscovering me through the distance we hadn't acknowledged. I tried to respond. I tried to be present. I let him kiss my shoulder, trail his fingers along my spine. But nothing inside me stirred. His touch no longer woke me. It soothed, like a sedative. The difference wasn't in what he did. It was in what I could no longer feel. I watched his eyes search mine for closeness, for some spark, and I gave him a smile that didn't reach anywhere deep. He fell asleep quickly, breath soft against my neck. I lay beside him in silence, motionless, the shape of the other kiss still alive on my lips. I reached for my phone. The screen glowed in the dark. I typed, "Are you awake?" Then deleted it. I typed again, "Do you want to see me?" I stared at those words for minutes, thumb hovering. And then I closed the message unsent, slid the phone beneath my pillow, and turned my body toward the window. But I didn't sleep, because the silence in my chest had shifted. Something inside me was pulsing, awake, waiting. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. Not a glance, not a message, not even the silent ritual of crossing paths near the hedges or the mailbox. His house, just across the street, might as well have been across a desert. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it was better this way, cleaner. But the ache in my stomach said otherwise. A dull pull that worsened each time I caught myself scanning his windows without meaning to. On the 4th day, I baked a pie. It was ridiculous. Domestic, something I hadn't done in months. Flour dusted the counter, butter melted unevenly, and my hands worked with a strange nervousness, as if busying them could distract from the buzzing in my chest. I told myself I'd take it to the elderly couple next door. I even boxed it carefully. But when I stepped outside with the warm container in my hands, my feet moved in the wrong direction. His door was open. Not wide, just enough to suggest presence. Music floated faintly from within. Something instrumental, soft, unassuming. I hesitated on the porch, heart slamming against my ribs. I hadn't planned this. Not like this. I knocked once. He answered in a t-shirt and jeans, eyes shadowed like he hadn't been sleeping well either. For a moment, he said nothing, just looked at me, then the box in my hands. "I brought you something," I said. "It's stupid. You can throw it away." He stepped aside without a word. I entered. The kitchen smelled like citrus and something unfamiliar. Paint, maybe? He'd been redoing a corner of the dining room, half finished, like everything between us. I placed the box on the counter and turned to leave. But before I could step away, his fingers closed gently around my wrist. "Why are you really here?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusing, just raw. I swallowed, unsure if I'd come here to admit or deny. "Because I couldn't stand not seeing you. Because I wanted to know if anything changed." He let go of my wrist slowly. "Everything's changed." We stood there for a long time, the silence stretching. The pie sat untouched. I watched his jaw tense, his hand clenched loosely at his side. "I thought it would be easier if I pulled back," he said finally, "to give you space, to not make things worse." "It didn't help," I whispered. "It made everything louder." He took a step toward me, then another, close enough to see the tiny scar above his brow, the faint smudge of paint on his shirt collar. I didn't move. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Not of you." He reached up slowly, like waiting for my permission, and touched my cheek. His palm was warm. My eyes closed. Not out of hesitation, but because I needed to feel without the distraction of looking. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth. "I can't be what ruins your life," he murmured. "But I also can't pretend this doesn't exist." "You're not ruining anything," I said. "You're just showing me where it was already breaking." He leaned in, but the moment was broken by a sound. Quick, sharp, too close. We both froze. Footsteps. Outside the window, I saw her. My neighbor, the one from 3 doors down. The one who always knew everything before anyone else. She walked past slowly, pretending not to see, but I saw it in the flicker of her eyes. A knot formed in my chest. Not from fear. From something colder. Awareness. The house no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a spotlight. "I should go," I said quickly, my voice tight. He didn't stop me. I crossed the street with the speed of someone chased, even if no one followed. The door closed behind me and I leaned against it, eyes shut, breath shallow. That night, my phone buzzed. "Be careful. No name. Just that." I stared at the message, the weight of it pressing against my ribs. And then I did what I hadn't done before. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside into the night, crossed the lawn, and knocked on his door again. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because something inside me had shifted past the point of silence. When he opened the door, I didn't speak. I stepped inside. His hallway smelled like cedar and faint varnish, as though something had just been sanded or repainted. The light was low, golden, soft. I stepped inside without looking back, without saying a word, closing the door behind me with a quiet finality that neither of us acknowledged out loud. He stood there for a moment, watching me with the kind of stillness that said more than any question could. But he didn't move. Not yet. I took off my coat and laid it across the arm of the couch like I belonged there. My movements were precise, careful, as if choreographed by instinct. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I didn't want to think. I wanted to feel. To see what would happen if I stopped pulling myself apart to be acceptable. He sat down across from me, hands resting on his knees. The space between us hummed. Something about the way he watched me, unblinking, not in hunger but in full presence, made the skin at the back of my neck tingle. I sat straighter, suddenly too aware of the neckline of my blouse, of how my legs were crossed, of the silk against my skin beneath the denim. We spoke in fragments at first, about the renovations he never had time for, about how the days were getting shorter. Nothing that mattered. But the subtext stretched beneath every syllable like a tightrope. Then he asked quietly, "Is he good to you?" It was the wrong question, or maybe the most honest one. "He's not cruel," I said. "He's constant." "Is that enough?" I wanted to answer right away. I wanted to explain that sometimes constancy feels like distance, that attention isn't the same as intimacy. that I'd spent years convincing myself that absence of conflict meant happiness. But all I said was, "It used to be." He nodded. The air between us stilled. A pause too long, too real. "Did you come back because of what she saw?" he asked. "Or because you couldn't stay away?" I looked at him. Really looked. "Both," I said. He stood slowly, moved toward me with the same quiet restraint that had defined every moment between us. No sudden movements, no urgency, just awareness. He reached for my hand, not to pull me in, but simply to hold it. I let him. "I don't want to hide anymore," I whispered. "But I don't know how to live in this and not unravel." "You don't have to know yet," he said, his thumb brushing mine. "Just don't lie to yourself. That's where it starts." There was a silence then, not empty, full, heavy with things neither of us were ready to say aloud. I felt his hand let go, gently, slowly, like even the release was meant to be remembered. I left a few minutes later. There was no kiss, no touch beyond the hand. But something had changed again. Subtler this time. Deeper. A quiet contract drawn between two people who had already crossed too many lines to go back. Back home, the house was asleep. The lights were off except for the hallway lamp. I walked past the living room where he had fallen asleep in front of the TV again, headphones still tangled around his neck. I stood in the bedroom, unbuttoning my blouse in slow, tired motions. The mirror caught me in profile. Bare skin, bra strap falling, my expression unreadable. I got into bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the softness of a hand around mine, the way silence can feel like safety instead of threat. And for the first time, I wasn't sure who I was trying to protect anymore. Him or myself. He told me he was leaving on a Monday. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the sky turns the color of paper ash and everything outside the window feels muted, as if the world is holding its breath. I stood in my kitchen, drying dishes I hadn't needed to wash by hand. The movement was mechanical, a way to keep stillness from swallowing me. The knock on the door wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I knew it would be him. He stood there, not on the porch like before, but just beyond the threshold. His hands in the pockets of his jacket, his eyes tired but clear. No pretense, no coded glances or excuses. Just the simplicity of two people who had already said too much without saying anything at all. "I need to tell you something," he said. I nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the air felt warmer, maybe because I'd been expecting cold. "I got a call this morning," he began. "A firm in Austin. Consulting work, 6 months. I'd applied weeks ago, before—" He trailed off. But the word hung in the space between us like a ghost. Before us. "You're leaving," I said, and it wasn't a question. He nodded. "In 3 days." I sat down on the edge of the sofa, the worn cushion folding beneath me. He remained standing, arms crossed loosely, like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to come. "I didn't want to go without telling you. I thought maybe this way I wouldn't make things worse." "You're not the one making them worse," I said, and my voice didn't break the way I thought it might. He looked at me then. Really looked. As if trying to memorize something for later. The slope of my collarbone, the way my fingers clenched slightly in my lap, the weight of a woman divided between two versions of herself. "I don't want to be a rupture in your life," he said quietly. "But I can't be the silence either." "I don't want you to go," I said. It came out fast, almost breathless, like a truth I had kept too long under lock. He stepped forward, sat beside me, careful not to touch. And yet his presence filled the entire room. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Not explain. Not decide. But before I go, I needed to know if this was just escape, or if you ever saw something more." I turned toward him. My shoulder brushed his. That slight contact unraveled something in me, and I let myself lean into it. Not out of desperation, but recognition. I saw everything, I whispered. And I still do. His hand reached for mine, this time without hesitation. And we sat there in silence, fingers tangled, breaths sinking not in rhythm, but in weight. I walked him to the door. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. After he left, I didn't cry. I went upstairs and opened the window. The street below was quiet, the sky folding into early evening. Somewhere behind the trees, his porch light blinked on for the last time. Inside, the house remained unchanged. My husband was in the garage tinkering with something I no longer asked about. The rooms carried the same silence they always had. But now I could feel the shift. Not loud, not catastrophic. Just real. In the mirror, I didn't look younger or brighter. I looked awake. I stood in my lace underwear, the one he never noticed, and I felt the air on my skin differently. Not like exposure, like choice. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know what I would say, or to whom, or how long I could live between what I had and what I'd felt. But I knew I would never again let myself forget the version of me that had come alive in another man's doorway, beneath glances, in the heat of hands that asked for nothing but truth. And when the porch light across the street finally went dark, I stood there a while longer, letting it happen. Letting it all happen.